Hello everyone, my name's Ryan. Welcome to my channel, The High Feature. On this channel, the plan is to disclose to you the most secret knowledge coded in the religions and how that knowledge is also being expressed in our science fiction, which is predictive programming, soft disclosure connected to the most elite knowledge on Earth. In this program, I'm going to sit down with my friend Puma, and we're going to have a great conversation, and we're going to try to bring to light this information in a beneficial way to the audience. Hello everyone, I'm sitting here with Puma. Hello Ryan. We're in Lagos, Nigeria, and we're going to try to have a difficult conversation.
I've been going through your contents, and for everyone who has come across your contents, I think we all will agree that most of your contents are controversial. If you will get to go live on these topics.
Yeah,
And we've been talking about it between us for a while.
Yeah.
Most of the things you are going to say today is going to be beneficial for the public knowledge.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I mean, I call it the intellectual person's spiritual philosophy, right? And what I'm trying to do is sort of interconnect a lot of different concepts that are across the faith in order to give people a general understanding of the nature of existence, right? Because that's the thing that everybody debates. And I know that we're existing right now because we're looking at each other and we're talking.
Yeah, and we're having this moment.
Yeah, exactly. But the nature of existence is the thing that people try to, that's debatable, right? And then some people like to say that there is no divinity, there is no grand benevolence, no divine creator in charge. And I kind of make the argument that there is. And I say that the religions are a lot more practical than what people understand and a lot more literal in the way that they've come to be is kind of hard for people to understand when you're looking at it from the lens that I kind of shape through my own personal experience. And I've talked to you about that in some of the uh, secret programs that are being operated, the bloodlines, the connection to these elites, right? And how the creation of humanity was done more as a genetic engineering experiment by the largest beings in existence acting on behalf of this creator for what was possible for them in the present moment. And what their aim and intent was this grand ascension experiment, right? To bring something into existence that's capable of these superhuman ascended abilities and then to transcend the physical form and achieve heaven, right?
You call that a human experiment. So by the human experiment, you mean the creator is in charge of this experiment, and we're all going through a process. What if said ended up in heaven, which seems like a destination. So what about those who fail in this experiment, who don't end up ascending to heaven? So what do you think is their consequence?
Well, that's the difficult part of the subject, right? Because, like, imagine that we're on a path of souls, and that there's sort of this field of consciousness we're animate out of and always connected to the beings in the present moment, right? So you have your ancestors and they're existing, and then they're making choices through their present moment that have led to us, right? And now we're sitting here facing a ton of disparity, right? A ton of difficult things. And a lot of people aren't valuing the spiritual, which sort of gives you that potential of achieving that heavenly realm, right? To transcend this. And then that's in life, but that's also in death, right? So the nature of the way you pass, who's around you when you go, the quality of the life you have is sort of determining the next position, the next place you achieve, right? So there's that for the regular component of humanity, and then there are those people that aren't valuing those things, right? The people that are putting the material wealth, status, uh, they're not working on relationships. They're not valuing the core things that you would say pertain to the cultivation of the soul, right? So those people are along that path, and then we're facing this sort of end time scenario, which is like the dark and scary component,
I think,
right?
but before we get into end time scenario, I'd like to bring it back to something you just mentioned, the transition into the heavenly. And I want to know, like, what are the qualities, the characteristics that makes one qualified? And you also talked about our ancestors and how a lot of them have been able to, pass this experiment. And for we who are still here, like, what is that guiding factor? What is that guiding knowledge that you want to share to us that will help us through this life's journey?
Like it's just simply service to others, right? And then in your relationships where you can, it's easy to get caught up in your own world, right? And then not spend enough time with your children, right? It's easy to get caught up in the ego, right? And then wanting to have higher status and then making your daily work about that and then not taking time for prayer, not taking time for thoughts about the creator, thinking about your own existence, right? And then we're sort of at the sum of uh a continuity of events that leads you to the present moment, right? So there's all these different choices that our parents made, our grandparents made, in what they valued and what they believed in that shapes the collective belief that we're in now, right? And then because a lot of the things that people are identifying with and the knowledge that they're buying into, they're not seeing the deception that's kind of happening with the general evil of the society that we're in, right? The money systems, the unfairness of so many different service to self modes, right? So you have the concept of, natural systems are kind of coming together out of entropy as they decay. And we're in this survival of the fittest mentality, right? Where the strongest survives. And then if you're willing to pursue that and be aggressive in that, then you can grow in status in it. And that's sort of been the mentality that is passed along generations, and it's brought us to this point where we're facing this dire need for change as a group, right? And then people are kind of terrified and then going along with it. And then one of the things was that COVID, right? How they did the scare tactic. They got everybody to submit to a dangerous experimental technology that caused a lot of harm in comparison to the real nature of that virus, right? So, but because everybody believed in that system, because everybody believed in that medical, right? They just kind of blindly went along with it. And then because of that, because we did that in the present moment a few years ago, here we all are in the future. And then a lot of people believe in that still. And it's kind of trained a bunch of behavior. And now we're moving towards digital currencies in vaccine IDs, which is one of the things that's sort of identified in the book of Revelations with the mark of the beast, right? And we're creeping towards that. And as we creep towards that, uh, it becomes sort of paramount that people speak out against it. So in service to others, it's sort of like um, always trying to be thoughtful to the other person as often as you can, and it happens in your heart, right? So the more gentle, forgiving heart you can have towards other people in a situation like you have a disagreement, right? And you have an opportunity to admit you're wrong, right? And not to rest on the error of your way and hold a prideful self, right? Yeah. And then to be generous, to be kind, right? The penance in Christianity to love your neighbor, right? As you love yourself. When you see somebody with a disability, to give that little bit of money that you might have to volunteer your time to other people and to do it without judgment, right? So sometimes people are down and out for whatever reason it might be, doesn't matter. It's non-judgment, loving acceptance of others, right? And doing your work in devotional service to the creator. So the way you do that is like how you walk on the land, right? The way that you treat animals, right? The way that you treat nature. So just simply being able to give those stray dogs some water, right? Being able to be kind to nature, to be living in a way that's less destructive and look towards doing that. And then having time you set aside for yourself for prayer and talk to your creator and worship your creator, right? Worship your creator because that's sort of the reason why the creator brought you into existence, because the two of it's a dynamic, right? Without us, the creator exists as this grand permanence, but has blessed us with existence. So we have to value our existence by thinking about our creator, by imagining how the creation works, and then talking to your creator, talking to yourself, have dialogue with yourself, have prayer and meditation, right? And then cleanliness of action. The foods that you eat, the words that you speak, the thoughts that you think, right? And trying to veer away from those types of behaviors, that carnal self, right? That ability to be destructive, the ability to overindulge in whatever your indulgences might be, right? Um, and then buy into the system, right? Like a lot of the problems that we have are coming because we don't know any better, right? We're raised in a way to believe in value things that aren't exactly valuable. When we're talking about attaining heaven, you can do it in your life now, and it's also something that's attainable in the hereafter, obviously. But the focus,
And we could have heaven on earth.
oh, for sure. That was the original intent of the human experiment, right? Was to create a being that has a natural capacity for the loving service, right? And to be able to see the creation in a way that is very unique, right? Because it's sort of the way the creation is working. If we're a manifestation of this grand benevolence, this intelligence, and it's who you get to be in the present moment, right? So they created Adam as this perfect being that has the ability to reflect the creator's light through the biology. But the experiment kind of became corrupted. And then because of the lineage, because of the way that the present moment works, because our ancestors went through this, we're inheriting this trauma, the past events, this reoccurring disaster cycle, right? So in order to overcome that,
Yeah.
you sort of have to make yourself aware of it, right? But the way you create heaven on earth for yourself is simply by working on yourself, self-reflection. So if you have relationships that, with siblings, for instance, maybe there's sibling rivalry and you've been in competition with one another and you haven't exactly been great to each other, right? And then you're in a cycle of abuse with a sibling, a cousin, a friend, even, right? A coworker. And because you're doing that in the present moment, then who will you be in the future together if you don't work on that relationship? So that's a portion of service to others, is recognizing the unity of being in each other, right? That we are all this fractal fragments of this grand intelligence, and that it has aim and intent for us to grow in loving service, but it gives us free will so we don't have to comply, and we can work against that by kind of a level of immaturity, really, right? When you know that you're hurting somebody and you have the ability to change your behavior
Yeah.
and say, you know what? I'm really sorry. I'm wrong. I'd like to apologize to you. The other person doesn't have to accept the apology, right? They can try to continue it, but you're breaking it, right?
Even if the other person doesn't reciprocate.
Exactly. You're putting down that boundary. And then because you've chose that for yourself, then you've created a different probable future outcome had you not chose to do that. Right. So, and then if the other person reciprocates back and says, you know what, you're right. Um, I was also doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I forgive you. You forgive each other. And then what's occurred is you've grown. You've registered that lesson, and that's inside the creator's aim and intent. So now you've closed down that cycle of abuse and you've changed the path you're on. You've opened a new door and you've gone through it. So now there's a whole different set of future probabilities for you that you can unfold your reality from. And that's ultimately what they're talking about in the religions, because they give you these philosophical things, right? One is like Allah's lamp in Islam, where they're talking about this master light and it's reflecting all these other lights. In something similar said in Hinduism with Indra's web, where you have the dewdrop,
Yeah.
the spider's web covered in dewdrops. The reflection of the one dewdrop is in every dewdrop, and in every dewdrop is a reflection of the one. So the idea behind it is that you have this whole unity of information, right? And then inside of that are all possibilities, right? So everything that you can think of is already thought of, but then by the creator, right? But then the probability of how things unfold is based on the emotional component, right? Because there is an aim and intent. So yes, this might be possible, but is it probable, right? And the governing principle on that is this larger set of aim and intent, right? So when you're doing your work from the perspective of service to others, you're changing probable future outcomes for yourself, right? So you could have an opportunity to display generosity. The creator is giving you a chance to be generous by putting a disabled person in front of you that's in need. And you maybe don't have a ton of money, right? And you're going to give from yourself, and it might put you in a more disadvantaged position in the short term. But because you did that, right, you displayed that generosity, it's now changing what the probable future outcomes can be for you because you're looking at the creation in a different way, and then you're choosing different behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of like what the creator wants us to do, but you have to have real time awareness of yourself in relationship to everything else. And that's where the biology comes, right? So you have neurological center in your heart. You have a brain that consists of two different sort of natures. You have a holographic sort of artistic right brain that has the ability to see all as connected. And then you have a intellectual sort of analytical mind that kind of sees things as finite,
Yeah.
plain materialism. And then you can say that this is masculine and feminine, but it's not just simply the left brain and the right brain because it's information stored holographically everywhere, right? So you have a brain and then you have an ability to cultivate it and harmonize it, right? And you do that by sort of valuing that emotional stuff, working on your philosophical stuff, right? Like what you think about and how you look at the world. You're an artist, so you're naturally able to tap that right brain, but then to work on the analytical part, the intellectual part, to tackle some hard subjects to think about, right? To do puzzle solving, to try to teach that part of the brain how to operate as well. So for me, I kind of have a little bit of both. And then there's meditations you can do, right? Like synchronizations. There's the Heart Math Institute in the Monroe Institute in the United States. They came up with something called hemisync, where they put tones in the ears, and the aim is to harmonize left and right brain. Because in doing this, you captivate the full power of the mind, right? And inside the brain, you also have a pineal gland. So the pineal gland is a sense organ, and it's related. If we look at lower animals in the evolutionary chain, reptiles, they have a parietal gland. It sits on top of the head. So if a bird flies over and there's a shadow,
Yeah.
it immediately alerts them to uh, the fact that there's a predator above, right? So we're more evolved and we have the sense organ, and it allows us to see spiritual sight. It gives us access to this non-local field that is defined in the religions, like as Allah. I like the Holy Spirit in Christianity, the Logos in Buddhism. Brahma's day is a great one in Hinduism because it describes this unity cloud that brings all things into being. The moment this original thought or Big Bang occurs, everything is brought into being instantly, and it goes through this process of unfoldment that's experienced in the theater of the present moment, which is where we're all existing. And then the present moment has certain qualities to it, right? Like, you can only experience things as duration, and you're thinking about the future, reflecting on the past, and then making choices about it. So that's sort of where that biology comes in. And you have that heart center. So the way to imagine is you have this biology that reads the field. So to think of this creative intelligence as a field that's thought of everything. So imagine it's perfect because it's the information for everything. And then think of it like the surface of a DVD. How you can see the information for the movie on the surface as a whole, but you don't see the movie itself. And then you require a dynamic between space and light and technology to transceive that. Well, that's the same thing for us. We're the mechanism that collapses the field, right? So then you have this heart center, which is the powerful creator, and then the gut and the neurons in the gut, right? So that's where you have the cleanliness of action component because there's weaponized foods, there's all kinds of addictive behaviors, right? So people are addicted to eating bad things, drinking bad things, they're addicted to bad words, they're addicted to harmful action, right? Nicotine, caffeine, sex, right? Working out, working, money, power. These are all things that become addictive because you're feeding into this energetic system that's obviously against the creator's aim and intent, and then it's pulling you along. And that's where you get into like the religions where they're specifying these evil beings and giving you a hierarchy of darkness and then a hierarchy of light.
Yeah.
And then that's how it correlates to the science fiction, believe it or not, the mythology and the fantasy, because they're depicting that. And then are they doing that just from their imaginations, all these artists? Some people are, you're transceiving this field, right? But they're also being instructed directly from these elite bloodlines and secret military programs. And that kind of brings us to where we were talking on the introduction of like predictive programming.
Yeah. So you mean the science fiction movies, the creative process involved in making those movies, like they are not all imaginative, you know? Some of them are what was the word to use?
They're deliberately getting, like, for instance, people would look at a set like Star Wars and they think George Lucas just wrote that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, not exactly. Right? He's playing in his own creative process, but he's getting this information from the military programs and some of the elite families because what that's disclosing are the bloodlines and the history of Earth and the religions, right? So you have the Jedi in the Egyptian tradition for a priesthood where they were these warrior monks, right? And then you have the Jedi, okay? And then Buddha's name was Siddharth. And then you have Darth Vader, right? A connection. Anakin, there's the sons of Anakim, the giant Goliath. Yeah, the giants, exactly. And then you have the Anunnaki, right? So Anunnaki sounds similar to Anakim. And then you have Manu in the Hindu mythology. And now these are these beings that are the watchers from the Book of Enoch, and also could be the jinns in Islam. Now, a lot of people attribute an energetic form to jinns, but I imagine it as more of a blanket term that could translate into something like aliens, because there are various descriptions of them and having a different capacity. And then we're trying to make sense of the religions and tie them together because we have all these different mythologies where you have these beings that are professing themselves as gods because they're getting a loose kickback.
Yeah.
And that's like an energetic kickback of like, "I'm good," when you know you're not.
Okay.
But souls kind of go astray into that because it's who you get to be in the present moment and what you get to do with yourself. And then you become the creator of it. And then when you're aware that there is this grand benevolence and intelligence, and then it's positioned you as this caretaker of this most sacred knowledge and one of the largest beings in existence, and you get into a fallen state and you end up doing these things. And then they enter into the experiment. They're not angels, they're in the rank of angels, and they produce these bloodlines. And then we see these bloodlines as being the ones that have the divine right to rule, right? So ultimately, we're kind of being deceived in the literalness of all this information, but then it's being released to us in these science fiction movies, these fantasies, these comic books with the, oh yeah, that's just fiction. That's just for children.
So
Right.
you refer to those as the soft disclosure.
Yeah. Yeah. Telling people the truth without telling them the truth
Yeah.
because it is like a karmic release valve for these people that are in control and that are doing these secret programs to say, well, we told you all the time. We put it in all the movies. We sent out our leakers. So we have our insiders that are working in these programs telling everybody, you guys just don't believe it. And then it's like, wow, that's really how it's working. And then from the standpoint of someone that's understanding this, you can see the spell that everybody's under. Right. And then the true power of that magic and how magic is something more literal, the manipulation of consciousness, right? The manipulation of the group think mentality because there's a morphic resonance, right? There's a cloud of human intelligence. And because you've got this mass of people believing in one certain thing, one certain way, then uh, it becomes very difficult for people to pull their minds out of it. They can't recompense around it, right? They can't, it's like a cognitive dissonance,
Mm.
but then that's why the religions are there. Right. And I like Islam because it gives you a biofeedback. It's discipline. It's good for me because I was in the military. I like forming up for prayer. I like the discipline of praying 5 times a day. And then to me, I'm understanding it because you're doing a renunciation of Satan, right? A submission to the creator, a connection to the creator, and then a simple plight for forgiveness. Just say, please forgive me. Like, you know what I mean? Because you can feel it in your heart because you know that you sin, right? And we all sin, and it's okay because as long as you're aware of it
Mm.
and then trying to be better, right? And do it on a daily basis. And then you can look back from year to year. Well, am I in a better place than I was last year? And spiritually, yes. Mentally, yes. And then in other areas, no, right? Physical health, yes. So yeah,
You're going through some stresses.
exactly. So like the stressors I go through, the magnitude of what's going on in the world. And then I showed you that the video of pictures of the event that took place at my house there
Yeah.
and the biblical dates that happened, right? So that the magnitude and the pressure of that, and then my desire to help other people, right? And then to have the fear
Mm.
of uh the magnitude of the mission, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like everybody on their own little path. And then that's what you're trying to do is you're trying to purify yourself in
Mm.
front of the creator with how you do your work in the present moment. And the best way to do it is to educate yourself in the different religions, right? To not totally focus down on one, but to look at all of it with an open heart and to look at all people with an open heart and try to be as kind and loving and generous and helpful and sincere as you can be. And the people that are kind of in those modes that are dark and the dark behaviors that are associated with that, you want to be in loving towards them and compassionate and understanding and helpful. And then people trapped in destructive self behaviors, you want to be as much of a service to them as you can as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, you've mentioned having heaven on earth,
Mhm.
and what about in situations where we go through things that are beyond our control? Like, can someone actually have a heaven on earth during a lot of crisis, like war,
Exactly.
like that?
Well, the thing is war is well within our control. Okay. Because like in the
There's
West,
a lot of victims of war. How?
okay, well, those
So,
people are being directly traumatized
yeah.
and damaged, right? Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, the Israelis. But then there's a whole bunch of people that are the accomplices to it, right? And that's all the people in the West. And like I pay taxes, right? So my tax dollars are causing this havoc, and I openly speak out against it constantly. That's what you have to do, but people are silent, and then there's a bunch of people that agree with it. They think Russia's a threat, right? They don't realize the threat is the willingness of people to put on the uniform and capitulate with it. If all the regular people on earth said, you know what, they're putting their guns down. I'm not buying into this anymore, right? We could get away from it. And then you think, well, that's impossible. That's too hard. But like I said, the beings from the religions are literal and they're connected to the most advanced secret programs on earth. So there's technologies that will immediately make all the money systems move, all these control paradigms we're stuck in, right? Where you have to pay for energy, where you can't provide clean drinking water for everybody. The healthcare systems are malevolent in an underlying tone because they're not being honest about some of the discoveries that have been made. So once there's discoveries that are made that can drastically revolutionize healthcare,
Yeah.
right? Drastically revolutionize energy production, drastically revolutionize transportation. And then those technologies are being sequestered. And then there's a level of awareness at the highest points of civilization in these corporate elites, these financial elites, these military elites, these bloodlines,
Yeah.
right? They have this information. So it means everything else that they're doing is not right. Right. And then our agreement to participate in it, because we're the ones that decide what has value. Right. If the people of the world united and came together and just simply demanded the truth from all of their leaders, all their people, they want full transparency, then we decide, right? So there are these people that are highly traumatized and victimized from the war, but there's also a ton of people that are complicit in it with their silence and becoming the accomplices of it, right? And we can simply, as a people, say we're not doing this anymore. Heaven on earth is something that is achievable, okay? But it's up to us to kind of to move into it as a group, right? And then it relies on the things that I mentioned where we're talking about service to others modes. And then you have a biology that's a gift to you from the creator, and you have an ability for these large, grand states of loving service, compassion, and all that sort of stuff. And then the way that you can access that is through those neurological fields because it boils down to choice making, right? And then the cleanliness of action component is all about the fine tuning of this instrument that is the body. So you can use those centers to access the information you need, right? To make the right choices, to do course correction on the path you're on.
You mentioned that these neurological centers are the hearts. It guides our emotions,
Yeah.
the brain, and our intellectual.
Yeah. And then the gut, which is the gut feelings, right? And then that's also in the religions. They say the gut is outside of time, the Buddha brain, right? Or you've got this gut feeling, right? So being able to sort of attenuate that biology and balance those centers, and also using that pineal gland as a side organ that comes through visionary states, dreams, uh, being able to see dimensional light, right? That's an organ that has to be cleansed and opened because there's a lot of environmental factors that are trying to calcify that. And there's stuff you can find on the net, right? That'll do that. And then in doing this, it allows us to have a lighter sense of being, right? And then the aim is to kind of polish that heart. And you do that with the people around you in the relationships you're in, as I mentioned, right? And then as for the bloodshed, you're completely right about having to stop this, right? And the trauma for those people involved is extremely difficult, but there is a philosophical outlook you can adopt that's laid down in the religions that allows you to kind of cope with these traumas. And then as citizens in the West, it's our duty to our brothers and sisters of the world to not go along with these wars anymore. And the people need to unify and mobilize against that, because as long as we're all killing each other, then who are we going to be in the future? Right? And we're being led along by a bunch of madmen, you know? If
Yeah.
we are, but we have the ability to say no. We have the ability to stop,
Got
but
the guts.
yeah, yeah, uh, it requires a group effort, right? And then we have to be able to get those little things aside. And then how many people are hoarding their millions that could be more generous, that could be uh, giving this money to better things? And people say, well,
We don't even need to attain millions before we start being generous.
no, we
A
don't.
little.
The regular people are really good with each other, but you have a whole class of people that have a tremendous amount of wealth that they could be using differently. And I think if they understood that this end time scenario you're facing is literal, right? That we're approaching this point in space and time where we're going to face cataclysm. And then what you do with yourself up to that point determines how you're going to get through it or not, right?
Okay.
And then that's about it.
Okay. I think we really had enough on this day, and I believe that each and every one of you watching this video, if you made it up to this extent, just like myself, I believe you've gotten some very vital information from Ryan. And yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.